Well, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you all. This is a special meeting of the Whatcom Public Utility District. And the purpose of the meeting is for a conversation among commissioners. Let's open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mike, are you willing to lead the pledge today?
There, I'm back. I'm on. I'm good with it. Okay, if everyone please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. Did I lose you, Mike?
Did you hear that?
I heard it all, yeah. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, I heard you, Mike. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. Let's use a similar approach that we did in our last special meeting. I'd like to start with maybe a roundtable of topics that we'd like to cover, and then develop an agenda from that. So the main topic that I want to follow up with the commissioners on is the topic of a municipalization study. It's something, of course, that's been raised by different people in the community, particularly from the city, since a little bit over about a year ago. And so and it keeps coming up. So it came up in public comment, a meeting a month or so ago. And I wanted to follow up. So I followed up with people, a few different people that have been involved in this conversation in the community. And I'd like to discuss that with the commission. If there's time, I'd be also wanting to talk about some of the community renewable energy projects. I had some meetings with folks regarding those possibilities on community scale projects that we could do in this community. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Mike?
Yes, O'Toole.
You have any items you'd like to discuss today? We have about an hour today, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Christina and Steve have a meeting at 9, so we're a little bit time constrained today as opposed to maybe on another day. But I just wanted to ask you, are there any topics you'd like to include in our conversation this morning?
At this time, I do not, but I know I'll take part as we go down through the meeting, but go ahead.
Great, and then Christine?
I think the two topics you brought up are pretty meaty and will take quite a bit of time to cover. I think within those topics, two things that I've been trying to learn more about is the Clean Energy Transformation Act rulemaking and kind of what that means for local communities. And so I'd be happy to share, a little bit of what I've learned, because I think that is relevant to the municipalization discussion. And then also, if we have time, we might not, discussion about some of the bills that are in the legislative session right now that relate to some of this, that we might want to consider supporting. But again, that's a lower priority, but could also sort of weave into some of the discussion.
I should ask Steve and Brian if there's topics that I know it's worth asking if there's something that you'd like us to talk through or consider.
Commissioners, I think that I'll let Brian respond also, but we've got in the next two regular meetings, we've got some planned presentations specifically from TEA talking about energy resource allocation, and then also policies that we may be bringing to you for consideration. So at this time, I don't have anything to add for today's agenda, but I don't know if Brian has anything specifically.
No, I don't. I think the topics the commissioners brought up is more than enough for today's meeting.
Okay, great. Well, so here's what I'd like to suggest is I'd like to suggest we focused more on the legislative policy and municipalization conversations today. And then if we get any time to provide thoughts on community renewable energy projects, we'll do that. But let's just we'll focus on the other topics first. And so I'll what I'm suggesting is that I start off talking about what I've learned and what the conversations have been regarding municipalization. And then we discuss CETA and policy. Maybe Christine, you can lead that.
Okay.
And that's okay. Let's go ahead and isn't it a plan that works for everybody? Mike, Christine? Starting off with the discussion of municipalization and moving on to policy and CETA conversations. Great. So start off by saying that the about a month ago, Jill, whose name for some reason I'm forgetting again, last name I'm forgetting.
McIntyre Witt.
Jill McIntyre Witt brought up in public comment, along with a few other people from the community, where are we at on the subject of municipalization. What I responded was that we had had a meeting with the city of Bellingham. There seemed to be interest in the subject of a study, but where it ended was Steve's very important question. And that very important question is, what do you want to accomplish with this study? And we didn't get a clear answer back. There hasn't been a lot of elected official conversation on the subject since then. And I agreed to meet with Jill McIntyre Witt and then people that had informed it conversation constructively. And that would be Jim Lazar and Cynthia Mitchell. And I'm going to summarize what came out of that conversation. What we discussed is that there's need, if there's going to be a study, we have to decide what the outcomes of the study are, very much a lot in being consistent with what Steve had suggested. So we went through I would call it a semi-brainstorming exercise to come up with what questions and what things we would want to look at. And so, can you guys hear my rooster right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Does he only do that on Groundhog Day, or?
No, he doesn't when, yeah, he's doing it a little bit, maybe a different time today, so it's interfering with my meeting, but it's really hard to discourage him. Anyway, moving along. So we decided we would look at what are the different kinds of actions that are worth considering. And we looked at 4. One is a Bellingham, a city municipalization, which would mean that the city would take over the electric grid within the city limits and serve city customers and create its own retail authority. to supply electricity. The next was the city of Bellingham undertaking something like, either through special agreements or through special legislation, what's done in California. This is consistent with some ideas that Brian had followed up to the commission. And those ideas were about looking at the California model and seeing if there are things that we can do here that would allow the community to have control, while at the same time allowing the community to focus on what they want, which is what they're using, a focus on their consumption. So that's what the laws around community choice aggregation in California were developed for. So that being another option, and Brian can probably talk about that more in detail as is appropriate in a little bit. I'm just going to go over the high level. Then looking at Bellingham entering into on behalf of not just the city, but on behalf of its customers and the residents of Bellingham, entering into a green direct program in combination with PSC, except making it an entire citywide green direct program. Then, of course, the idea of the PUD municipalizing countywide. And then as a baseline, looking at business as usual, or I should say there really is no business as usual. Business as usual meaning CETA compliance, meaning the as reflected in the current PSC IRP as far as supply. So looking at those 5 options in comparison to each other, and looking at those as they impact community functions or services. And so if you imagine the 5 items I listed as being like rows in a matrix, that would be the output of a study. The following items I'm about to present would be, sorry, I misspoke. If we describe the 5 items that I just listed as columns in a matrix, meaning different actions that happen community-wide, then the items I'm about to list now would be like rows in a matrix. And let me go through what those are. We would want to look at the cost of energy. We would want to look at the jobs impact. We would want to look at the broader economic development impact. And we would want to look at carbon, the impact on carbon emissions as related to the community. And then I suggested, and it's as an important item, would be the impact on connectivity. Why? Because all of these grid infrastructure related choices actually do impact our choices as far as how we lay fiber. They have a big impact on it. So an ancillary impact of different choices with utility infrastructure would also lead to, for example, if in the case of a countywide municipalization, there's potential for substantial savings as it relates to the cost of laying aerial fiber. May not be a significant factor, but and as time goes on, we might identify additional factors that are important in a study. But right now, what I like to do is to, after the conversations last weekend and the weekend before, summarize this in a chart and then send it to the commission and staff for further review, and figure out if this is something we want to pursue, this kind of a study. So that's my introductory statement. I think it's a very high level summary of what it is, but I think it's the attempt of this is to start answering the really important question that Steve raised: what is the purpose of a study, and what do we want to accomplish by looking at a study? And I guess in summary, in the one-liner, I would say what we want to accomplish is look and compare different options for changing the our regional grid, our Whatcom County grid, in a way that improves carbon and potential economic development characteristics for our community. So with that, I'll leave it and let's open it up for discussion.
Commissioner Desmani?
Yeah.
Could you go back and expand a little bit on 4 and 5? If the PUD countywide approach, do you see that being in collaboration with the city of Bellingham? And so that it's not just the PUD outside of cities. And I think that the issues that you raised, in terms of cost of energy, jobs, economic development, carbon emission, all that, I mean, it certainly, if the city of Bellingham would go on its own and do a similar analysis or study, it would seem like it would be much more effective in terms of a countywide, including all cities, all areas of the county, if the PUD and the city of Bellingham did this, jointly. That's all.
So maybe let me ask a clarifying question. What I had envisioned, first I'll say what I was envisioned present in presentation of this to you all was that we would be looking at the option of a PUD countywide municipalization, which wouldn't include municipalization, of course, of the already public entities, which would be Blaine, for example, and Sumas. It would include the city of Bellingham, and I certainly a good point, Steve, that it would be possible to do both a city municipalization and a county municipalization, but I wasn't considering that. I think some of those questions about might be a suitable conversation for, as this conversation proceeds, about exactly how each of these scenarios should be fine-tuned to allow for more analysis after the fact. Also, the matrix done in the work done in such a way is that it can allow people to explore things a little bit too, that they might want to explore. I would want to, since so much of this is driven by the city, I would want the city to contribute to this exercise. I think that the city doesn't have the as much technical background that's relevant to be able to do this kind of exercise, nor the same kind of connections that the PUD does in terms of finding third-party consultants to do this work, which is obviously we'd want to use. We wouldn't want to be the doer of the study. And so for that reason, I think it would make sense for us to be the overseer of it, but we definitely would want city support.
And this is a minor point, but when you just referenced City of Blaine and City of Sumas because they have their own electric utility right now, I wouldn't, if there would be a countywide analysis or study looking at all these issues that you brought out, and the idea of a establishment of a countywide electric utility, I wouldn't exclude those two cities from the discussion, because if the PUD would become everything that PSC does now in the county, I certainly think that you'd have an opportunity to have those two small cities join in the discussion as to how they can benefit and how they can integrate, their utilities into, a quote public utility. So.
Right. And in particular, it would open up some opportunities for collaboration too. So what I want to be able to do is to take this in some form, obviously more mature than what I'm discussing with you at this particular point. And I'll you know, what I'll do is I'll do a write-up, and Steve, I'll do my best to incorporate the comments you're making about, for example, Blaine and then Sumas, and then also about being more clear about what each action, potential action would entail. Send it to the commission for the purpose of discussion, then allow us to refine it a little bit better. And at some point, I'd like to send this to the city council and see if they're willing to provide resources to conduct a study. You know, I think that would be the logical progression.
Just another thought also is that if we talk about, you know, potential funding for this type of an effort, and you called out, you know, cost of energy, jobs, economic development, impact on productivity, I would certainly think this would be something that if there's an agreement by the city of Bellingham, especially to join with us, that we would take back to the county EDI fund for getting financial support.
Yeah, as you were starting to describe it, it made complete sense to me. So yeah, I predicted your punchline.
Can I jump in and share some of my thoughts?
Please.
Of which I have many. We could have a whole day conversation about this. But, you know, I think right now, you know, I've talked about this idea of public ownership in the past. And I think that one of the reasons why there is discussion in our community about it, and I am certainly hearing from folks in the community that are interested in this and want to talk about it. And it's because of a lack of control is what I'm picking up. So local control is usually one of the driving reasons behind a municipalization effort. And I've looked at a lot of municipalization efforts around the country. Many of them have failed. Because you know, there's usually tremendous resources from the investor-owned utility, the incumbent that, you know, wants to prevent the municipalization from happening. But I think the reason it starts is because people in the community don't feel heard. And I think particularly with climate change, there's just tremendous change that's happening in our energy system, and people want it to go faster, and they want more of the benefits to happen locally. I do think that we need to be really cautious about assuming that public ownership means a faster transition to clean energy. I mean, if you look in the Northwest, we have so much hydro that public ownership does often translate to cleaner energy. But if you look nationwide, that trend isn't there quite as much. You know, I have been learning a little bit about the Clean Energy Transformation Act. I mean, it's obviously, the rulemaking has been like an 18-month process. It's pretty complicated. But there is a lot in there about equity and job creation and clean energy implementation plans, which are in theory supposed to kind of force investor-owned utilities to engage and listen to local communities more. To be determined what that looks like when the rulemaking happens. And as we all know, passing a law and doing rulemaking is just the first step. We really learn so much about policy during the implementation, and things can change. So, you know, a tool, I was on the resource adequacy webinar last week, and I think you were too. So I just went to the first day of it, but I mean, you know, across the West Coast, so many different states and utilities have set these clean energy targets. And I mean, the word staggering was used many times. The transition that we have to go through over the next few decades is tremendous. And, you know, one of the key things that I keep hearing about is transmission, and how we just don't have adequate transmission resources. And so I would love to see more and more of our energy produced locally as a way to reduce some of those transmission costs. So, you know, that's also one of the best ways to create jobs locally. You know, a lot of my work with utilities has been on demand side resources. And that has been something that I've always felt really, we're bad at demand response in general in the Northwest, but it's crazy to me that it's 2021 and we still don't have demand response in Whatcom County. So, you know, what I have always said is trying to find a middle path would also be nice. I don't know, there's sort of mixed reviews on whether community choice aggregation is working well. It sort of depends on who you talk to. You know, I think doing a study looking at some different pathways would be great. You know, I think one other thing that we might want to keep in mind too is that one of the benefits of being a public utility is some of the funds that we can take advantage of, like USDA funds for different loan programs. So that, you know, is there a way that we could use those USDA funds to run programs in partnership with PSE? You know, there's a lot of different options that we could look at, but I do think that to be responsive to the community, we do need to start digging into some of the different roles that our PUD could play in this really significant energy transition that we're facing right now. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know how deep we want to go right now, since we're already halfway through our time. I'm gonna give Mike a chance to weigh in now.
Thank
you, Mike. Yeah, love to hear from you, Mike.
Of course, I'm a strong believer in public utility and the things that we can provide to our community, our county. So I'm interested in this subject. But I'd like to ask Christine, you're hearing community input. Is that a local community? I'm going to say like Bellingham, or is that a county interest in power? My experience is it's best to work with those who have interest and find a solution, and others will probably join us instead of saying we're going to take on the whole county, because without their support, we will fail. And I prefer not to go down a route like that. I want to be successful in what we want to do. So if it's one particular area, City of Bellingham, I know has interest in it. Is that what you're hearing from, Christine?
I mean, this is just based on essentially people that have reached out to me to talk about it. So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of interest in Bellingham. I've also been in touch with members of the Whatcom County Climate Action Impacts Group. They all have different acronyms. So apologies if I didn't get that quite right. You know, Lummi Island, Linden, I've heard, I mean, there's a lot of different people that have different concerns about our energy system and not getting what they need from it. And they often, and so because we are elected officials representing a public utility, I think that we are people that they can come to talk about their concerns. So I would say that a lot of what I have heard is related to the delay in transitioning to clean energy that they have perceived with our current electric utility serving most of Whatcom County. But, you know, I've also heard some concerns about, you know, just kind of having like adequate service to, for example, a farmer in Linden that can't upgrade his equipment because there isn't a transformer. They need a transformer upgrade. So, you know, and you know, you hear too. Well, I'll stop there. So I can't characterize the whole. We need to do a survey to really get some better information on how people feel about this in the community.
And I appreciate what you said, Christina. Thank you, because I too, you know, have heard from different people throughout Whatcom County, and actually farmers. Yes, a lot of farmers are going from a single phase to 3-phase because of all their equipment, and they can't find the 3-phase. And I've heard that too. So yes, there's things out there. So I just want us to be successful at this. And if we want to go forward, I want to hear from the two of you about where can we put our energy and be the most successful. And if the city of Bellingham is the biggest populated area of interest, then I would say without a doubt, that's where we start. I have been working with Steve on the strategic planning, which eventually in one of our upcoming meetings, we'll talk about it. But one thing I do know about Steve is we hire the people we need to do our daily functions in the PUD. We don't hire extra staff to just, so everybody is already has a full plate or full load that works for us. For us to do anything, whether it's broadband or power, we need to start looking at hiring people to do what we want them to do, to come back with studies or whatever information, because I think it's the best way we're going to get what we really need. And how do we answer the community's questions without that person dedicated to doing that and heading up studies for us? I don't know if we could succeed. So I don't know what the two of you think about approaching something like that. First of all, hiring someone. Secondly, if the city of Bellingham is interested, then would they come in and support us hiring somebody and put some money into a study? Because I think that's the best, fastest way to get to the answers they need, we need, to find out how do we approach something like this. Altul, I know you've been very involved. I'm just starting to get back one meeting so far with Energy Northwest, and I know they're working on that project called Ruby Flats, I think it's called. Altul, you probably know better than I do. You know, they're going to start with 75 megawatts on a solar project, and they want to go to 300. They're trying to find PUDs that are interested in getting involved. So right away, I don't know, is that an avenue for a road for us to travel that we could start looking at solar power to bring into Whatcom County? Altul, you know more than I do on this because you spent a year or two with them. So, okay, that's all I had to say.
So if I may, I'd like to take the conversation that's happened so far and focus it in on the task of a study. I'd like to make I'd like to offer that it seems to me that because this topic has been discussed so much in our community, and I think we've talked about all the different places it's shown up over the last year or so. Because it's been discussed so much, I feel like we do have to move forward and do some kind of a report capturing the fact that we're aware of that. And then to look at some aspects that would help educate further discussion. And I, after the comments from Steve and Christine and Mike, I've got some specific additions to what I presented, and I'm not sure exactly how I'll do that, but I'll spend some time with my notes and prepare something to send to the commission for review. But the things I want to incorporate is a reflection of more than one possibility based on Steve's comments. Basically, not just, of course, looking at one possibility or the other, but possibly leaving the open of looking at the combination of possibilities. Address funding. Make clear that this effort requires that we want people to contribute to it, affected local governments to contribute to it. In the case of the city, potentially the county. So address funding. To deal with, to address the important comments that Christine, you made, to add an aspect of the study that looks at reflecting the voices that the voices from the community are being heard. This also chimes in, blends in some of the input from Mike, and making sure that we have an ability to communicate to the community and give them some front end input in this study. Perhaps a county-wide open forum where we would invite input to this from people on the study before we do a final RFQ or RFP, whatever, for the study. And of course, we're not done with this right now today. So once I produce this draft, in the next few days, we'll have multiple opportunities to review it and refine it. And obviously other people in the community will be able to do the same. So with that, I'd like to put a bow on this for the time being, and perhaps there may be any final comments on it. And then we'll be able to work with a written document going forward.
I would like to just say one other thing. I don't know if either one of you, have been in touch with PSC about this, but, I think it's important that one of us communicate with them. I mean, I know that, I think that it's important that we explain that this is a process that is important for our community. And it's important for our community because even if we don't go this direction, we need the analysis to sort of explain to everyone that we've gone through this process, we've had the conversation, and we're making a fully informed decision as we move forward, on this really critical energy transition. So I'm happy to be the point of contact with PSC, but I think that continuing to have a healthy dialogue with them about how we move our community where we want to go in the fastest, most economically sound way is the goal of this, and that we want to continue to have open dialogue with them. Does that seem okay?
Sure. So just so you know, Karen's on this call.
I saw that. Yeah.
So maybe those obviously we are all available for an email too, and it might be beneficial. So whatever form of communication, we're very open to having that communication with PSC, and we always have been. The PUD has a long history of working with PSC. Sometimes annoying PSC, and PSC is annoyed the PUD too, but we have a very healthy long-term relationship with, and our county is better for it. So I look forward to continuing that relationship, and I think the more that we're all engaged in, the better it is for the community. And since we're all mature professionals, we can make sure that those relationships are managed well. So I'd like to transition, if it's okay with the other commissioners, to more of the policy CETA conversation. And one thing that Christine, you mentioned before you talk about CETA and policy, I wanted to mention is that I have had a chance to briefly review the latest IRP from PSC, and right now, to a cursory review, it appears that although coal production has been dramatically reduced, it looks like it's largely going to be replaced with natural gas production. That's the way the IRP looks to me. And in that natural gas production, is that natural gas going to be base load, or is it going to be just peaking capacity? And that's what I'm trying to understand. So even though its actual capacity is roughly the same as the coal capacity, will that be not operated very much, I guess is the question. So with that subject, as well as with ongoing legislation, I am also aware that a big focus of the ongoing legislation is to give push everybody, public utilities and investor-owned utilities, towards further electrification. So with that, maybe I'll let you take the lead in the last 15 minutes here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have spent a little bit of time trying to educate myself more on the rulemaking process for the Clean Energy Transformation Act, and you know, the big milestones are to be well, I don't have my notes up right now, but essentially to be coal free by 2026, and then by 2045 is the kind of final date for when all investor-owned utilities and public utilities are 100% have 100% clean electricity. And the big thing with the rulemaking with the investor-owned utilities was working with communities more directly through what I was talking about before, the clean energy implementation plans. And the Utilities and Transportation Commission will have more of a say in those clean energy implementation plans than they have in the past with IRPs. So they can essentially provide more feedback if it's not meeting the rules of CETA. There's a really strong equity focus, including having the investor-owned utilities look at Department of Health data to identify communities that have been the most impacted by our or are likely to be highly impacted by climate change and existing energy infrastructure. One of the other things that I think is relevant to our PUD with CETA is that hydro does count under CETA as long as there are no new diversions. And so I think that this is, you know, and Brian, you and I have talked about this, but I think it's an interesting opportunity to again look at a, you know, micro hydro project with the PUD's existing piping infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more details we could go into, but I do think that CETA will provide some more opportunities for the community to be slightly more engaged in how energy planning happens.
So how do you see that? How does that actually happen? Meaning, does a PUD like us contribute to the IRP, or what? How do we actually participate? And how does the community, whether it's PUD or not, people in the community, let's say somebody wants to do a community solar, community wind project, independent of the PUD? Because I think I already made clear, I've got a list, but I don't want to talk about it now because we'll run out of time. But how do we participate in that aspect of CETA?
Well, I think that, with the clean energy implementation planning,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I have tried to get a little bit more information from most of the information that I have about the rulemaking has been from other advocates working on the rulemaking process, representing kind of equity and environmental communities. I have not been able to get much information yet from PSC about the clean energy implementation plans. But my understanding from UTC information is that it'll either be through RFP solicitations like they've done in the past, or I think there's also the potential to do direct agreements. So we might be able to work with PSC on a direct agreement for some sort of a micro hydro project, if it makes sense. And I know that there were some challenges in the past, Brian, when you looked at that project, with costs and interconnection agreements and things like that. But, the rulemaking just there's still a lot of information that isn't available yet about how PSC is going to do the clean energy.
So there's
planning.
one other county which, and this is taking real liberties when what I'm about to say. There's one other county that we can look to, which would have similar, albeit at a much greater scale and a much greater maturity, interest to Whatcom County, and that's Snohomish County. Why? Because you've got a public entity and a private entity in the same county. Of course, there's no comparison in the scale of activity of Snohomish PUD and Whatcom PUD. And none of us I think we're both happy about that, and maybe jealous, but the Snohomish County has no shortage of hassles to deal with as a publicly owned utility, but they do lots of collaboration with PSC. And can you imagine what their IRP's challenge is going to be like, and how do they plan? I mean, so Snohomish County's solar project, for example, is a good template for us. Their community solar project that Snohomish PUD has done is a good template for, and I've discussed that in the past, but and we'll get into that in the future in more detail, but there might be a common interest for PSC, Snohomish PUD, Whatcom PUD to have a meeting with people in the rulemaking department of CETA to explore how we might collaborate under CETA to advance community renewable energy in particular. Now, this is just an idea, but perhaps there's a potential for I will tell you one person I know who knows quite a bit about the rulemaking is Nicholas Garcia at PUD. He may be a good first step for the commission to have a conversation about this subject with staff at our PUD and maybe a commissioner, and then advance that conversation to with the state office. And is that under Department of Commerce that's doing the rulemaking? Yeah, that's why I think, yeah. Okay, so I don't know if that's something that what other folks think about that subject of CETA. And I don't think by the way, I don't think we're going to get onto legislation. But so I'm suggesting that maybe we leave legislation for another time and continue to focus on the CETA IRP conversation. So I'd like to hear from maybe if staff has any thoughts on that or other commissioners.
Yeah, I could add a couple of comments, Commissioner, regarding the CETA requirements. We will be, number one, directly involved because we're subject to meeting the goals for clean energy that's in the CETA legislation. And we are short, and we're not at 100% clean currently. We're probably 94% under the new definitions. We still got 6% of our current power supply that wouldn't meet the CETA requirements. So we will be directly involved trying to address those resource issues. We could look at in-county resources as well as out-of-county to fill that gap. The other thing is regarding work with other utilities. As a energy services provider, in a sense, we always have the opportunity to bid into an RFP for resources. So we could right now, if we had a resource we wanted to develop it, bid into PSC's RFP solicitation or work collaboratively with them. One of the challenges we're going to have going forward is this dichotomy. If we're looking at small scale resources to serve community needs, those small scale resources may not meet existing customer needs, and that we're now serving large loads that their incremental load increases in a lot of cases will far exceed the small scale resource that we might have the opportunity to participate in. So, jumping forward, I like the conversation I heard regarding municipalization and the different forms it may take, because we could have an electric utility that operates on two planes. One is it's the traditional utility that builds facilities, connects to customers, and provides power supply to them. On the flip side, we're an electric utility that provides energy services, doesn't build facilities, but provides services to end-use customers we're not connected to. And that's kind of the vein where you're developing a small-scale resource that the community may want. You may be able to sell that resource to the community without being connected to those end-use customers. So just the thoughts off the top of my head.
I just wanted to quickly mention, there's what we're talking about is a relationship with PAC that's got to become more multivariate, multifaceted, and figuring that out is going to take a real sincere effort on our part.
Commissioner, you were asking where things were at with the process for PSC and looking at its IRP. While we're talking, I was also Googling the UTC and their docket, and it looks like on the 28th of last month, the independent energy evaluator was approved by the UTC for PSC, and that is Bates and White, Bates and White. And I can forward Steve that order and it can be circulated. And that was entered on the 28th of January.
So on this, I guess what I would like to ask the commission is, what are the next steps for the commission as it relates to the subject of CETA, PSC's IRP, what we perceive to be the wants of the community, and figuring out how we work with PSC to advance some of those interests and wants. Does a meeting on the subject of CETA and rulemaking make sense as a target? And is there a commissioner who wants to take the initiative of that? I feel very comfortable pursuing that. I would like to hear from others.
I would be happy to also do that. I mean, I think that in general, the process here that I think we need to undertake is we need to sort of paint a picture for where we want to go as a community on energy and make sure we have a vision. And I think that I've heard a lot of that, especially with my work on the Climate Action Task Force and with the county and my involvement with the county group. and then say, how are we going to get there as fast as possible with the lowest rate impacts to our community? And and if you're all in PSE and you're ready to be a complete community partner to us, then let's see your plan. And if there's if we can be a part of that, so that our community also feels like they have ownership over this transition, that's probably going to benefit you too, PSE. Or do we need to go at it alone if we don't believe that we can get to that vision with the current business model that PSE is using, which is, you know, a for-profit model. So, you know, I would be happy to talk with PSE about, I would like to learn more about what these clean energy implementation planning plans are, and when they, you know, are planning to start and what they would look like. And like you said too, Atul, I think just some overall listening sessions with people in the community that really care about this topic would make a lot of sense.
So, Steve, it seems to me that what we're talking about is that we need to continue exploring. It's not a specific thing to pursue, except for a lot of individual things to pursue that are coming up, and that all of us will continue to investigate. But it seems like we need a day-long event where we talk about, I mean, at some point in the relatively near future, where we have, for example, PSC come and present their IRP and have a open discussion that's very inclusive of PSC and where they're at, and explore possibilities for collaboration regarding community energy. We got to include demand response in there for sure. We got to include in there conversations around infrastructure and opportunities for us to collaborate in every way possible. So, and we should probably plan that together with PSC, because they would need to bring people from other parts of the state to have the conversation with us. So I'm thinking we need to do that kind of a energy summit for the people of Whatcom County.
I can follow up with PSE after this.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, I'm fine following up with Nicholas as well. So, because I talk to him all the time. So.
Okay.
I think it would be, you know, especially the two topics that you've discussed today. I certainly don't see them as standalone, separate. And so I think that looking at setting the goals of, doing a study or an analysis, a survey, a community discussion around municipalization, you've highlighted some of the same things that you talked about under CETA. And I think that might be a good approach is to, as Commissioner Grant reaches out to PSE and starts that dialogue with them. And right now we're planning on having over the next two meetings, regular meetings, presentations by TEA, on talking about energy resource acquisition and policy, that we might want to look at maybe that a meeting maybe the first Tuesday in March, to have that 2-hour, 3-hour session on energy issues, and gives us some time to start developing that. Who do we want to have in that discussion? I don't mean excluding, quote, the public, but how do we want to structure that discussion at that special meeting, and dialogue with PSE, help them, if you would, prepare for that discussion and start laying out some of these goals and expectations that that the community is bringing to you, whether it's in the city of Bellingham or the farmer that can't get the service that he or she needs, and have that, and that discussion then could lead to the broader, development of what that first step in analysis of municipalization really, what we need to look at. The other is that, and Commissioner Murphy brought it up, but I mean, this discussion, along with the discussion that we'll be having more on broadband, will lead to, obviously, will lead to much more work on behalf of the commission. You commit to having, more outreach and listening to the community, but it's also going to create demands on, on our staff. So I just want to make sure that we all are conscious of what our workload can provide, what we can provide to you to move this discussion forward.
So I think we're out of time and a little bit over, so I want to respect that. There's one thing that I think I committed to as far as sending an updated document about municipalization and other options study. And are there other things to wrap up the meeting that anybody has to offer? Obviously, we're going to have many energy conversations. If there's any doubt about that, this makes it very clear. Mike?
Yeah, I don't really have a lot or anything to really add up to, but I appreciate the subject coming up because, it's been something that people want to talk about for quite a long time. So I'm happy we're talking about it. We need to figure out what the next step. Sounds like Steve's already started to touch on stuff like this. So, and I appreciate both you and Christine and your leads of understanding many things in this area. This is, I've always focused more on the water and things. So I appreciate the two of you and your interest and understanding of energy and reaching out. So thank you to both of you.
Well, thank you. And so with that, is there anything else? We can go ahead and close the meeting and go off to our other meetings.
I'm good.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending, and we have some follow-ups. And go ahead, Steve.
Just a note, Commissioner Grant, I advised Gina yesterday in our discussion yesterday that we might be as long as 9:15. So why don't we
Okay.
just take a few minutes and plan on getting on at 9:15, if that works?
Okay. Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Good planning, Steve.
We never
All right.
run over our meeting time.
No.
All right. Bye-bye, all. Thank you.